They called me unladylike for the rifle long before they ever called me brave for it, and I have lived long enough now to know that both words came from the same frightened place. I was 24 years old in the spring of 1883. On the morning, a stranger rode up the Willow Creek Road and changed the whole shape of my life with a single sentence. The sun was barely up over the Bitterroots, and the cold still hung in the bottoms where the creek ran, the kind of cold that turned your breath to smoke and made the world feel newly made. I had been awake an hour already. My father had taught me that the steady-handed hours belong to the morning, before the day got loud and a person's nerves went to rattling, and on the Brennan Ranch, the day got loud earlier than most. There was a coyote that had been working the chicken yard for a week, bold as a banker, and that morning he came again at first light, slinking along the top rail of the far fence with a hen's worth of trouble in his eyes. I had my father's Sharps rifle across my arm, the big single-shot buffalo gun he'd carried up from Texas, heavy enough to bruise a careless shoulder and accurate at distances that made other men whistle. I set my feet, slowed my breath the way he'd shown me, slow in, hold, slow out, and let the shot live in the quiet between heartbeats. And I dropped that coyote off the fence post at a distance I will not name here, because folks never believed me anyhow. The shot rolled out across the flats like thunder with somewhere to be, and from down on the road, a man's voice said, "Easy as you please." Well, I came looking for honest work, and I believe I just found the most dangerous yard in the territory. I turned with the Sharps already coming around, my heart up in my throat. A man sat a leggy gray horse not 30 yards off, one hand loose on the reins and the other resting on his thigh, and he was grinning the way a man grins when he has seen something he intends to remember. He wore a trail-worn hat pulled low, a coat gone gray with dust, and the kind of stubble that comes from too many nights under open sky. But his eyes, when he tipped the hat back, were a clear pale brown, like creek water over sand, and they held something I was not used to seeing on a man's face when he looked at me. It was not alarm and it was not appetite. It was plain admiration, with no fear underneath it. "You've got a careless habit," I told him, "of riding up on armed women." "Seems to me the carelessness is all on my side, ma'am." He swung down with the loose ease of a man who'd spent more of his life on a horse than on his own 2 feet. "That's a Sharps, your daddy's." That surprised me and I let it show. It was. "He taught you to shoot like that?" "He taught me," I said, when every soul in Cedar Crossing told him it was a waste of powder on a girl. Something moved across the stranger's face then, a shadow of understanding, and he looked from the rifle to me and back, and he said the thing that the whole valley would be repeating until I was an old woman. He said it quiet, like it cost him nothing because it was only the truth. "Then every soul in Cedar Crossing is a fool. A woman who can shoot like that, that's the kind of woman a man would be a fool not to marry." I had been told for years what kind of woman I ought to be: quieter, softer, more inclined toward a needle than a trigger. The good people of the valley looked at my rifle the way they'd look at a snake curled up in the church pew, something dangerous that had wandered in where it had no business. And here was this dusty drifter, hat in hand and trail dirt to his eyebrows, saying the precise opposite as though it were the simplest fact in the world. I did not have the first idea what to say to it, so I said, "I'm Della Brennan. This is my ranch. If you're hunting work, I can't pay much and the work is hard." "Wade Mercer," he said, "and hard work's the only kind I trust." He looked past me at the pole corral, where a half-broke roan was watching us with murder in its heart. "You break your own stock." "I'm trying to. That one's trying to kill me back." Wade Mercer looked at the roan, and the roan looked at Wade Mercer, and he smiled like the two of them had already come to an understanding. "Reckon I can earn my coffee." That was the morning I met him. I would like to say I knew, the way they say in the stories, that my life had turned on its hinge. The truth is plainer. I knew only that for the first time in a long while, a man had looked at the thing that made me strange and called it the thing that made me worth something, and I carried that the way you carry a coal in your pocket on a cold day, afraid of it, and grateful for the warmth. You have to understand what the ranch was, to understand what came after. My father had filed on the Willow Creek land when I was a child, and he had built it with his own back and his own stubbornness into something a family could live on. Then the diphtheria took my mother one autumn and took him 3 years after, and it left me at 21 with a deed, a debt, and a brother to raise. Sam was 12 that spring, all elbows and questions, with our father's chin and our mother's soft heart. I loved that boy past all reason. Everything I did with one eye on the future. I meant to hand him the land, the water, a name in the valley that meant something better than poor. The trouble was that the land cost more than it earned, and the note Harlan Vance held against it was due in the fall. Harlan Vance had been my father's friend for 20 years. He was a soft, prosperous man who kept an office above the Mercantile in Cedar Crossing and helped half the valley with their papers, deeds and notes and water filings, the dull machinery that turns dirt into property. When my father lay dying, it was Harlan who sat by the bed and promised to look after his children, and I had believed him the way you believe a thing you cannot afford to doubt. He held my note. He'd filed my water rights. He patted my hand and called me child, and told me not to worry my head over the paperwork, and God forgive me, I didn't. The other thing you have to understand is the goose. Sam had named him General, on account of how he ran the ranch yard like a tyrant in a feather coat. He was a great ill-tempered gray gander with a wingspan like a barn door, and a personal grudge against every man who set foot on Brennan land. He had bloodied the shins of every would-be suitor the valley had sent my way, and there had been a few, for a widow's brother's ranch with water on it draws callers the way honey draws flies. General had run off the lot of them, hissing and flapping, and I had come to think of him as the truest judge of character in 3 counties. The morning Wade Mercer first walked toward the corral, General came at him low and fast, wings spread, screaming his war scream. Wade stopped, looked down at 30 pounds of furious poultry and did not run. He took off his hat very slowly and held it out and said in the gravest voice, "Sir, I mean no disrespect to your command." And General, I swear this on my mother's memory, General hissed once more and then waddled off, unsatisfied but unwilling to commit, and Sam laughed so hard he sat down in the dirt. "He don't usually let nobody live," Sam told him, delighted. "I'll take it as a truce," Wade said, "and not a friendship. A man knows where he stands with a goose like that." He earned his coffee that week and the next. He had a gift with horses that bordered on the unnatural, quiet hands, endless patience, a low, steady voice that talked the murder right out of that roan until the animal followed him around the corral like a pup. He fixed the windmill that had been screeching for 2 years. He mended fence. He never once made a remark about how strong I must be to throw a saddle, never once expressed surprise that I kept my own books and ran my own range. He simply worked beside me as though it were the natural order of things, and at the end of the day he'd drink my coffee and tell me his was the best he ever had, and I'd tell him he had low standards and he'd agree, and we'd both be lying. It was Wade who told me, one evening with the light going gold over the flats, what was coming. "You know a man named Silas Crane?" he asked. "Everybody knows Crane, biggest outfit in the valley, why?" Wade was quiet a moment, turning his tin cup in his hands. "Because he's buying out every homestead along this creek, or running them off when they won't sell. Cattle that size needs water more than it needs grass, and there's only so many springs in this country." He looked at me. "Della, the way I hear it, the Brennan Spring is the last one between Crane and the whole of Willow Creek. Sooner or later that man is going to come asking, and Crane don't take no for an answer twice." I have thought about those weeks more than any others in my life, because they were the last weeks I was only one thing. After them I was always 2 things at once, strong and frightened, certain and lost, a woman alone and a woman not alone at all. The work threw us together, and the threat made the work feel like something we were doing against the dark. We branded the spring colts. We rode the fence line, and somewhere in there, without my deciding it, the talking changed. It went from horses and weather to the things underneath. I told him about my parents, how the diphtheria came one October and left me an orphan and a guardian both, how I'd been 21 and terrified, and too proud to show it, how my father had taught me to shoot, because he said a woman who could feed and defend herself was a woman who'd never have to marry a man she didn't want. He said dependence was just another kind of cage, I told Wade. He'd rather I died an old maid with a full magazine than live married and afraid. Wade laughed at that, but gently. I'd have liked your father. He'd have put you to work and not paid you, and you'd have loved him for it. I poked at the fire. What about yours? The light went out of his face for a moment. Mine told me I'd amount to nothing the day I left, he said. I was 17, hadn't a reason to doubt him, the way things have gone since. I've drifted from one outfit to the next for 10 years, telling myself I was free. He looked into the cup. Truth is, I was just lost. A man tells himself a lot of pretty things when he's got nowhere he belongs. And now, he met my eyes, and the firelight made them warm. And now I'm in less of a hurry to leave than I've been anywhere, he said, and that scares me worse than Crane does. It scared me too, if I am honest. I had built my whole life on needing no one. It had cost me dearly to learn it, and here was a man making me wonder whether the lesson had been wrong all along. The threat came on in the meantime, the way weather comes on. First it was rumor. Then Harlan Vance rode out to the ranch in his buggy, all sympathy and soft hands, and sat at my table and told me that Silas Crane had made a generous offer for the place and that, as my father's friend and the holder of my note, he felt duty-bound to advise me to take it. The fall payment will be the death of this ranch child, he said. Crane's money would clear the debt and leave you a stake besides. A young woman alone, a boy to raise, there's no shame in selling. Your father would understand. My father, I said, would understand that this is Sam's land, and that I'd sooner be buried in it than sell it to Silas Crane. Harlan sighed like a man grieved by a stubborn child, and patted my hand and drove away. I told myself he meant well. I told myself a great many things in those days. Then Marshal Quaid came out, and there was no telling myself anything after that. He was an old, square, honest man, the kind of law that isn't fast but is fair, and he sat his horse in my yard and did not get down. Della, he said, I won't waste your time. 2 homesteads up the creek burned out last week. The Petrie place and the Alsons. Nobody saw who, but everybody knows. Crane wanted the water the folks wouldn't sell, and now there's nothing left to sell. He looked tired in a way that went past his bones. You've got the best spring left in this valley and the least men to guard it. I'm telling you what I'd tell my own daughter. Be careful. Keep that rifle loaded. And if you see strange riders on your range, you send the boy for me and you don't try to be a hero. I'm not much for heroics, Marshal, I said, but I'm not for running either. He studied me a long moment, the way my father used to. No, he said finally, I don't reckon you are. God help us both. It was Sam who saw it first, and Sam who told me, in the way of a boy who doesn't know the weight of what he's carrying. He'd ridden into Cedar Crossing for nails, and he came back full of news. Della, he said, hopping down, I seen Wade in town talking to one of Crane's men, the big foreman with the scar, Birch. They was talking like they knew each other from way back. Birch called him by his name and slapped his shoulder and everything. The cold that went through me had nothing to do with the season. I waited until that evening when Wade came in from the corral, and I did not let my voice shake. You rode for Crane, I said. It was not a question. He went still. Della. You rode for Silas Crane, and you came up this road the same week he set his eye on my water, and you've spent a month learning every inch of my ranch and every weakness it's got. My hands were steady because I made them steady, the way I made them steady on the rifle. Tell me I'm wrong. You're not wrong that I rode for him, Wade said. He didn't move toward me. He had the sense not to. 2 years back, I broke horses for the C-bar same as I break them for you. But get off my land. Della. "Get off my land, Mr. Mercer, and don't you come back." My voice cracked on the last of it, and I hated that it did. "I trusted you. I told you things I never told a soul, and the whole time you were his." He looked at me for a long moment, and there was no anger in his face, only a kind of grief, and he picked up his hat and he said very quietly, "I'll go. But I want you to know the rest of it, whether you believe it or not. I quit the C-Bar. I quit it because Crane told me and the rest of the hands to go run a family of homesteaders off their claim, and I wouldn't do it. I've done a lot of low things to eat, Della, but I never burned a man out of his home, and I never will. I drifted up this way because it was as far from that man as a road would take me." He set the hat on his head. "Birch knew me because I broke his string for 2 summers. He slapped my shoulder because he doesn't know I despise him. That's the whole of it." And then he walked to the gate, and General came at him one last time, screaming, and Wade just stood there and let the goose hiss itself out. And then he went, and I stood in my own yard and felt like I'd shot something I'd had no call to shoot. He came back 4 days later at dusk, because that was the evening they came. I heard the horses first, too many horses, moving with the deliberate slowness of men who want to be seen, who want the fear to do half their work. I had Sam in the root cellar before they cleared the cottonwoods, the sharps in my hands and my father's old revolver in my belt, and my heart going like a hammer on tin. There were 6 of them, fanned out across my yard in the dying light, and at their head rode the big scarred foreman, Birch, with a torch already smoking in his fist. And from the dark at the edge of the corral, a low voice said, "You're going to want me on your flank, Della, and you can hate me for it later." It was Wade. He'd come up afoot through the creek bottom, his own rifle in his hands, and he stepped into the last of the light with his hands easy and his eyes on the riders. And I understood in that instant, the way you understand a thing in your blood before your head catches up, that every word he'd said to me had been true. A man does not walk back towards 6 guns for a lie. "I told you to go," I said. "You did," he agreed. "I went. Now I'm back. There's a difference between leaving because you ask and leaving because I'm scared, and I'd be obliged if you'd notice it." He almost smiled. "Where do you want me?" And from the dark behind us, absurdly, gloriously, General came waddling out and took up a position at Wade's left boot, hissing at the riders like a feathered sergeant, and Wade looked down at him and said, "Took you long enough." And despite the guns and the torch and the fear sitting in my mouth like a copper coin, I laughed. Birch walked his horse forward into the yard. The torch held high so the light fell across all of us, and he was grinning the ugly grin of a man who has done this before and enjoyed it. "Miss Brennan," he called, "Mr. Crane sends his regards. He's bought your note and he's filed on your water, and we've come to take possession of what's lawfully his." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. "Got the deed right here. All proper. You can read it your own self before we put the torch to the house. Crane's a generous man. He'll let you walk off with the boy and a wagon." "That deed's a forgery," I said, "and you know it, and so do I." "That's a hard word, ma'am, from a woman with no proof and no help." Birch lowered the torch toward the dry grass at the edge of my yard. "Now you can stand there with your daddy's old buffalo gun, or you can be sensible. You won't shoot 6 men. "No," I said, "I won't." And I raised the sharps, and I shot the torch clean out of his hand. The big rifle roared and bucked, and the torch spun away into the dirt 20 feet from where it had been, and Birch yelled and grabbed his stinging fingers, and his horse near came out from under him. In the ringing silence after, while every man in that yard sat frozen, I worked the breech, slid in another of my father's long cartridges, and set the sights on the brim of Birch's hat. "I won't shoot 6 men," I said, and I was astonished at how level my voice came out. "I don't have to. Gentlemen, I want you to look at that fence post yonder, the one with the tin cup on it that my brother left out. It was 150 yards off, a small thing in the failing light. I shot the cup off the post. It leapt into the dark with a sound like a struck bell. I reloaded before the echo died. Now," I said, "I can do that all night. I've got a whole crate of cartridges and a steady hand and not one thing to lose, because this is my home and my brother's home, and I will defend it until I'm dead in the dirt. The question for you boys is whether Silas Crane is paying you enough to find out which one of you I decide I can't miss." I looked straight at Birch. "I'd start with your torch hand, since you've already proved it's clumsy." Nobody moved. A horse stamped. Off on Wade's flank his rifle was up and steady, covering the right of the line, and General was still screaming, and somewhere in the gathering dark a man's nerve was beginning to come apart. You could feel it, the way you feel a rope start to fray. "She's bluffing," Birch said, but his voice had gone thin. "I have never bluffed in my life," I told him. "I find it's cheaper to just be able to do the thing." And that was when the second set of riders came up the road, and my heart fell into my boots because I thought it was more of Crane's men. But it was Silas Crane himself. I knew the silver on his saddle, and riding at his side, soft and prosperous and pale as milk in the torchlight, was Harlan Vance. I want to tell you that I had suspected him all along. I hadn't. I had aimed all my fear at Wade, the stranger, the easy mark, the man who looked like a wolf because I didn't know him. And the true wolf had been sitting at my father's grave with his hat in his hands, holding my note and patting my hand and calling me child. "Harlan," I said, and my voice finally broke just once on his name. He had the grace at least to look sick. "Della," he started, "it didn't have to." "He's the one drew up the deed," Wade said, low and certain, not taking his eyes or his rifle off the line. "Isn't he? A forged transfer needs a man who knows your papers, knows your daddy's signature, knows the filing." He let it sit. "Who else but the friend who keeps them?" And Silas Crane, who was a clever man and a cold one, heard the whole thing turning against him in the dark, and made the mistake clever men make, which is to think they can still talk their way clear. "There's nothing here but business, Marshal," he said to the dark, to no one, and I understood he was bluffing too, throwing the marshal's name out to see if it landed. It landed. "Funny you should say so, Crane," said Marshal Quaid, riding up out of the cottonwoods with 2 deputies and a shotgun across his saddle, "because the boy come and got me 3 hours ago, and I've been sitting in that tree line the whole time, and I've heard about every word." It came apart for them quickly after that, the way these things do once the law is standing in the yard, and the gun has gone out of the bully's hand. Marshal Quaid took the forged deed off Birch and held it to the torchlight and read it, and then he looked at Harlan Vance the way you'd look at something you'd found in your boot. "Harlan," he said, "I've known your hand 30 years. I know it like my own. And I know your daddy's hand, Della, because I witnessed half the papers in this valley." He folded the deed. "This here is Harlan's hand pretending to be your father's and pretending poorly. That's forgery and forgery in the service of arson and threat, and I expect when we open Harlan's strongbox we'll find the real note he's been hiding so he could call it due and steal the place clean." He nodded to his deputies. "Take them both. Take Birch. Crane, you'll come too, and we'll let a judge in Helena sort out how much of your business is the burning kind." Silas Crane did not go quietly, but he went. Harlan Vance went quietly, and at the last he turned in his saddle and looked at me, and he said, "Your father trusted me," as though that were a wound I had given him and not the other way around. I had no answer for that. I have never found one. When they were gone, when the dust had settled and the torch had burned itself to nothing in the dirt, I sat down on my own porch step rather suddenly, because my legs had decided they were finished, and Sam came running up out of the cellar and threw himself against me, and I held him and shook, and Wade stood a little apart with his hat in his hands, not presuming, until I reached out my free hand and pulled him down to sit beside us, and we 3 sat there in the dark and breathed. The shaking is the body finishing the fight after the head has called it one. I know that now. I did not know it then, and it frightened me, and it was Etta Boone who set it right the next day, when the whole valley came out to the ranch the way folks do after a near thing. Etta ran the boarding house in Cedar Crossing and had buried 2 husbands and a war's worth of grief, and she sat with me at my own table while the men talked outside, and she took my hands, which were still not quite steady, and she said, "You're carrying something." Out with it." "I trusted him," I said. "Harlan, I trusted him like family. I let him hold my papers and pat my hand, and I never once doubted, and he was selling me the whole time. What kind of fool?" "The kind," Etta said, "who knows how to trust, which is not a flaw, child, whatever this has taught you. The shame belongs to the man who broke the trust, not the one who gave it." She squeezed my hands hard enough to hurt. "You'll be tempted now to never trust a soul again and to call that wisdom. Don't. That's just fear wearing a Sunday hat. You trusted Harlan and Harlan was rotten. You doubted that cowboy out there and that cowboy walked back toward 6 guns for you. Your judgment isn't the thing that failed. Your judgment is the thing that's going to save you, if you'll quit being scared long enough to use it." I have thought about that too, more than most things. The valley turned the way valleys do. Mrs. Whitfield, who had spent 3 years informing anyone who'd listened that I was a scandal and a poor influence and certain to come to a bad end, arrived with a basket of bread and an apology that cost her more than I think she'd ever paid for anything. "I was wrong about you, Della Brennan," she said stiffly. "I was wrong about the rifle. That rifle saved this end of the valley. I should be ashamed, and I am." And her son Royce, who had courted me with all the charm of a wet dog and sulked when I turned him down, took off his hat and said he was sorry for the things he'd said, and that he hoped I'd be happy, and I believed he half meant it, which is as much as you can ask of a young man's pride. Wade took the work Marshal Quaid offered him. There was a deputy's badge going, and a valley full of homesteads that had learned the hard way they needed a fair man with a gun. It didn't pay much. He said he didn't care about the pay. He said the job was just an excuse, and we both knew what it was an excuse for. There was no father for him to ask, of course. I'd buried mine 3 years gone. So one evening on the porch, with the cottonwoods going gold and the spring running its quiet music down in the bottom, Wade Mercer cleared his throat and asked Sam. "Sam," he said, very serious, "I've a mind to marry your sister if she'll have me. And seeing as you're the man of this ranch, I figured I ought to ask you for the right to court her proper." Sam, who was 12 and shrewd, considered this with the gravity of a judge. "You'd live here." "I would. You'd help with the colts. Every one. And you wouldn't ever try to make her quit shooting, or sell the place, or be different than she is." Wade looked at me when he answered, and he said, "Not for all the water in Montana." Sam nodded slowly. Then he grinned because he was still a boy under all that gravity. "All right," he said, "but first you got to make peace with General for real, not just a truce. He's got to let you pet him." And he folded his arms, satisfied that he had set an impossible price. It took Wade 2 weeks. 2 weeks of stale bread offered at arm's length, of low, patient talk, of getting his shins bloodied and never once kicking back. And on a Sunday morning with half the valley watching from the yard, that terrible old goose waddled up to Wade Mercer, considered him with one cold eye, and allowed himself to be patted exactly once on the head before biting Wade's thumb hard enough to draw blood. Sam declared it a pass. Wade declared it a friendship. General declared nothing and went off to terrorize the chickens, his honor intact. We were married under the cottonwoods in October in the gold light, by the creek my father had filed on and I had refused to sell. I wore my mother's plain band, which Etta had kept safe for me, and I carried wild asters that Sam had gathered, and Wade stood across from me clean-shaven and so frightened and happy that his hands shook, which I found I loved him for. Marshal Quaid gave me away, since there was no one else, and grumbled the whole walk that he was getting too old for tender feelings, and cried anyhow when it came to it. When the pastor asked Wade for his vow, he didn't have it written. He just looked at me and said, "Della, I came to this valley with nothing but a horse and a bad opinion of myself, and I rode up your road and watched you knock a coyote off a fence at a distance no man would believe, and I said out loud that you were the kind of woman a man would be a fool not to marry. I meant it as a joke that wasn't a joke. I've never stopped meaning it." His voice steadied as he went, the way a man's does when he stopped being afraid of the thing he's saying. "I promise to stand beside you, Not in front of you, not behind you, beside you. I promise to never once ask you to be smaller than you are. I promise that this is your land and Sam's land, and I am only ever a man lucky enough to be let stand on it. That's my vow, before God and the goose and everybody." And the valley laughed, and I cried, and I gave him a vow of my own that I will not write down, because some things you keep. I am an old woman now, and the sharps hangs over the door where Wade hung it the day we married, polished and ready, though it has not been fired in anger in more years than I can count. The spring still runs. Silas Crane died in a hell in a cell and Harlan Vance in a worse one, and the C-Bar got broke up and sold off in pieces to the very homesteaders he tried to ruin, which is as close to justice as this world generally manages. Sam grew tall and took over the high range and has grandchildren of his own who think I am a story. Wade and I had 41 years, and I will not pretend they were all easy, because a marriage is a piece of work like a ranch is, and the work never finishes. But he kept every word of that vow. He never once asked me to be smaller. And on the morning he died, in our own bed, in the house we defended, the last thing he said to me was that the coffee was the best he ever had, and we both knew it was a lie, and I have never been given a better gift than that lie. They called me unladylike for the rifle. They were right that it made me strange and wrong about everything else, because the rifle was never the point. The rifle was only the thing my father gave me so that I would never have to depend on a man's mercy, so that when a man finally did come up my road, I'd be standing on my own 2 feet and able to choose him, free and clear, the way you choose a thing and not the way you grab at it because you're drowning. The young women of this valley come to me sometimes now, and they ask how I knew. How I knew Wade was the one to keep and Harlan the one to fear, since I got them so exactly backwards at the start. And I tell them the truth, which is that I didn't know, that I trusted the wrong man and doubted the right one, that I was as much a fool as any girl in love has ever been. And then I tell them the part that matters. I tell them that home is not a thing that's given to you. Not by a father, not by a town, not by anybody's approval. Home is the thing you decide to defend. You plant your feet and you slow your breath, and you hold the line in the quiet between heartbeats, and the man worth having is the one who walks back toward the guns to stand at your shoulder, and the goose, somehow, always knows him first. That was the beginning and the long middle and the better than happy ending. That was the whole of it. And it all started one cold morning with a coyote on a fence post, a stranger on the road, and a sentence I didn't believe at the time and have believed every day since.